I'll come back a little bit to more technical talk. It's about OpenNebula in configuration management. It's actually about certain configuration management system that's called cdist. And by the way, our company name is ungleich for everyone who's, well, not a German speaker. It's not the easiest thing to do. So I apologize for our company name. We realized after we actually went out of Switzerland, it was like, well, okay, too late. So yeah, I would like to give a short introduction to cdist and also to configuration management. I do actually just have about 10 slides. I just compensate with the previous speaker. So actually, I was wondering, like, who of you is using configuration management in any kind? Just wondering, like, a short survey. Or let's do the other way around. Who's not using configuration management at all? Yay, we have, cool. So it's more or less nobody here. It's great to hear. Because we were talking before about OpenNebula and other cloud virtualization platforms that I'm not going to name again, there are different ways how people actually see configuration management. And actually having an etc passwd on your computer is, in my opinion, already somehow configuration management, because you agreed on how to store users in a certain way on your computer. So when I talk about configuration management, I always break it down to configuration management is manage configurations in a well-defined way, on a way that everybody in your environment agrees on. This can be various. There, in my opinion, and I'm kind of biased because I tried. You can challenge me later if you want to. I tried almost every existing configuration management tool out there, and I can tell you about all the negative things and also some positive things. In the end, I personally think it breaks down to it needs to be reproducible. Whatever you run as a configuration management system, you run it twice, you run it 10 times, that's idempotency, it always the same result. And somebody else actually can take whatever you did, and it's still the same result. That's, I think, also coming back to Carlos, management is actually what's costing you money in your organization. So having this as part, configuration management is documentation, so you really want to reduce the amount of work that you're doing there. It's not much about like buying hardware, it doesn't really cost you a lot. Another thing that I've seen when designing cdist is scaling out from the very base. Being able to do that, it's an important thing. I don't know, how many of you are like maintaining more than 100 servers? More than 1,000? Okay, cool. More than 10,000? Okay, fair enough. I actually, the tool cdist actually has its origin at a university in Switzerland. It's called ETH, or Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule. Anyone heard about ETH Zurich so far? Okay, cool. Cool, actually, it's great. So we were actually starting with some other tools I'm not going to bash today. You can ask me later. And the real problem is when you're usually you start small with configuration management system, have a look like, does it fit your very simple jobs? And usually it works. And then you begin to add all the servers that haven't been managed, and it gets more and more and more, and at some point you realize, how do I fix this scaling issue in my configuration management system? How do I add like 2 or 10 or 20 more configuration management systems so you actually can scale out and configure more servers? Yeah, I guess some of you have seen this before. So the question is like, first of all, like, why yet another configuration management system? I think it's a very valid question. at the time we started development of cdist, this was in 2011. Actually, I also was wondering, like, who has been at LISA conference in the States before? Just wondering, anyone here? 2, 3, okay. For those who don't know the conference, okay, a small advertisement here. It's a great conference about system administration in the US, once or every year at the West Coast, every second year at the East Coast, vice versa. And I actually had some talks there about configuration management systems. It was like, well, how do you solve this and this problem? And everybody was like, yeah, we work around this. So I was actually claiming like, well, to build configuration management system, you don't need to have a lot of things in there. What do you basically need? You need some kind of package management, user creation, file handling, directories, processes. So it kind of boils down to something like, let's say, 5 to 10 things that you actually want to manage with a configuration management system. And I was thinking, when I was actually claiming there in a talk in the evening, like, well, you can actually build such a configuration management system like in 2 weeks work maximum. And actually 2 weeks later, we had a running prototype, all in shell script. And the reason why I'm talking here today about cdist is actually because it fits very well into the whole idea of OpenNebula. Like when you compare OpenNebula to, well, I don't want to talk too long about this, but OpenNebula is very simple also in our point of view, and that's also why we as a company use it. And we actually don't have time to do complex things or to learn things that are by design too big. So we were just saying, well, we need a very simple configuration management system. And that's all cdist is about at the moment. I will just quickly go through how it looks like. I will start with this term here. Don't know how many of you have spent time in installing agents for different configuration management systems. With cdist, you will never do this. And actually, the term zero dependency configuration management system was created by one of our users who was like, wow, cdist, I can just use it. I don't have to install anything on my nodes. And for me, it's very clear that this is the only possibility for a configuration management system. Because if you're actually installing things to your computer, to your node, before you have configuration management system, you do have a second configuration management that you have to do. In case of one more popular configuration management system, it meant like 3 to 4 years ago that you have to install a particular version of Ruby, some gems, and you have to all get this together, configure it, configure where the certain management node is. And I was really asking, like, why? You know, isn't it wrong to all configure your computer before this configuration management? So cdist actually requires only an SSH server on the machine, and actually all communication is done via SSH. cdist, in comparison to other tools, is by default push-based. So when you want to configure a node, you have a management node here, and you go there and configure it. The reason for this is because we're interested in production environments. Our customers are into, well, let's say, enough uptime so their customers don't realize they're down. And when you have a lot of servers and you want to configure a certain set, you usually want to do this push-based. So you say, this set of servers is now going to be reconfigured to a, let's say, new version of your application or different configuration. So that was our main choice. You can also run it the other way around, but by default it's push-based. We claim to have good documentation. Let's put it that way. It is more technically orientated than we sometimes like to. We are aware that for really beginners, the documentation is not easily accessible. But what we did in the first place was cdist is completely documented in man pages, because we were thinking like, well, whoever is going to use cdist will be a sysadmin, so we will start with the man pages. yeah, besides that, cdist is from the ground, it's scalable. If you're configuring today 100 servers, tomorrow 1,000, the day after 10,000, well, you need to get some cores to do that, but it completely scales out. Doesn't matter how many servers you have. And it actually scales more or less linearly. And that's things that we did some benchmarks there. It's pretty cool to see actually when you configure 1, 10, and 800 servers, and your line is just straight. It's pretty cool from the amount of cores that you need. When I said cdist originally, in the first 2 weeks, it was completely written in shell script. Nowadays, you write the manifest or the configurations in shell script, but the core itself is in Python. The background there is that shell script in its today's form, it's not fast enough to configure like a lot of servers at the same time. More background info I can give to this like after the talk if you're interested. So we also call cdist the next generation configuration management system. In our point of view, it's easy to use. It doesn't have those facepalm effect when you say, oh my god, why did they do this like this? It should be straightforward to use. Also, from the design, it's very, very simple, and you will be impressed if you have a look at it, like how simple it is. Yeah, push support I talked about. Essentially, what we did is more or less just combining SSH, shell, and the management so that you can actually have things well together. We do also have something that no other configuration management system has. We do have installation support. So what you can do is you can take bare metal and configure it with cdist. And this is really something nobody else so far, I claim, has ever solved. And this is running in production at some of our customers. They are early adopters. And yeah, I think this is kind of the way to go because you have everything in your configuration management system from this computer runs Fedora, this one runs Ubuntu. It's all in your configuration management system. It has those partitions, and you can all do that. It's still in the 4.0 pre-branches. It has not been officially pushed by us because we are still testing, but it works. Before I said the core of cdist is in Python, and don't be afraid, you don't have to install Python on the target machines. You only have to have Python on the configuration management nodes. And we do require a quite recent version of Python. That's Python 3.2 or later. We'll soon even maybe change to 3.4 or later. But it's only on the configuration management nodes. It's not on the nodes that you want to configure. There you only need SSH in the default case. So how does it typically look like? As said before, we are using a push-based approach. So a typical way how people work with cdist is they develop on the notebook, they test, test, test. And for testing, you can either have testing or staging environment you configure. And after, and in my point of view, this is a really important point, after you've found out, well, oh, my configuration actually works, then you create a commit. Then you push it into your version control. Not as opposed to other tools where you just create commit, 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 and try to test it. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, I will create a new commit. Oh, the last commit, it was like, I forgot a semicolon. The previous commit I made was also not great. Okay. I mean, you probably have seen those commit messages like fix the last thing or another fix or whatever. If you do this, I think you have the wrong configuration management system. My claim. So, another thing that we are kind of proud of, what I didn't say before, cdist is completely open source. It will always stay open source. There will no commercial version available. If there will, at some point, it will be somebody else doing it, not us. Like the core is always open source. And for us, it's also very important. It's similar to the whole idea of OpenNebula. We I'm opening a small bracket here. There are some monitoring tools you may have heard about, some older ones, multiple times forked, which also have a commercial equivalent, which people are not using because of the constraints that you have with this. We think that in general, open source software should be completely free, and whatever you do around this, like patches, development, this should be paid, or support should be paid. So we're kind of in a similar track, like how OpenNebula is doing. We do have some types, not all of them have been pushed upstream for actually managing OpenNebula clusters. So you can actually say, or we actually do this, we are providing hosting on managed servers, or managed as in the hardware is being managed. And we do everything with cdist there to set up our OpenNebula clusters. So when we actually have more demand from our customers, you're just setting up new complete clusters for OpenNebula with cdist. And yeah, as I said, they are not completely open source yet because they are not in a pretty state, but we can share them on request, or they will still be on GitHub anyway. Right. I think that's it from my side. I think I might be within 20 minutes. If you have questions, I'm open now, and if you have questions later, we would also be reachable at various situations. Yeah, right.
Yeah. A big problem with all configuration management systems is they don't have integration tests. So whenever you change code at the port, you have virtually no way to know how much of the ecosystem you bought. So even the most famous configuration management tools do not have that.
Right.
Do you have that?
No. Yeah, sure. So the question was, like, if we have integration overview, like, I think essentially the question is, if you can visualize what is the impact on your infrastructure if you change a line of code. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually you run make test, and it tells you if the test passed or not.
Right, right. So actually, we do not have any kind of testing in that way integrated. We do think about adding something like unit tests to our types midterm, but what you described, like to have an overview of like what is the change to the infrastructure, we think it's a really, really interesting project, but it does not necessarily need to be in this core. It can be also an external thing that helps you to get an overview. Right. Are there other questions? Yep.
You say you require SSH on every node that you're configuring. You know, there's always some minimal configuration that's needed to get SSH working. How does cdist handle that?
Right, you know, you can actually also install your machine using cdist when you just boot up via PXE, boot up via USB stick, or we are very old-fashioned with a CD-ROM, you can do that, and then install your system using cdist.
cdist self-contained installer. Okay.
Yeah, so, but you know, I think most systems are currently coming up with SSH open already. So, yeah.
Your keys are there, right?
Sure.
Or your keytails or whatever you have.
Yeah, the key management we also do via installation usually. Sure. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nico Schottelius. I'm from Ghent University.
Right.
I would like to comment on the question about tests.
About?
I would like to comment on the question about testing.
Yeah, testing.
So we're using Quator, which was originally developed at CERN to install the, do fabric management for the grid, but it's also usable for smaller or bigger infrastructures, and we have tests for every backend component that we use. So all the components that are running when you install a system have tests to make sure that if something changes, you see it. And what we also do is, what I didn't see here, is that whenever we change a line in the configuration itself, it's actually statically checked for mistakes, both syntactical mistakes, semantical mistakes, before we deploy anything.
Great, great. Thanks a lot for the hint. So I just repeat for everyone. There's a tool called Quator.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, developed at CERN. So if you need more information about this, there's a guy, just raise your hand. So no, we can follow up later. There were more questions?
Will there be Windows support when Windows finally has a native OpenSSH server?
In theory, Windows could be supported because Windows can also run SSH. In practice, we are a Linux-only company, so we don't have an interest in supporting Windows. However, if you're paying us enough, we will hire Windows developers. That's easy.
How do you compare to Ansible?
Ansible, it's a good question. I think Ansible was kind of developed in a similar time. Ansible is, in a way, more structured, a little bit more limited, because Ansible configurations are defined in YAML. We, as I said before, cdist is completely based or configured in shell script. So whatever you can do in shell script, you can use in cdist. You can do looping with for, you can do looping with while, you can use pseudo arrays or real arrays in shell script. So whatever you can do is just defined by your shell. So it's quite extensible. Besides that, to be honest, our user base is not as big as the one of Ansible. We are also up to, I think right now, we're not pushing any kind of marketing whatsoever. Whatever grows with cdist is also based on the community. So people using it are from different regions of the world, originally from France more, but we're not actively marketing it. It's just we're using it for our customers, and they like it. So, any more questions? No? All right. Thanks a lot.